Hey, I'm Kevin. This is Design Magic, and we're going to discuss a little bit about design philosophy. And I'll use some of my examples of playing around and stuff like that when I was younger. One of the things that that I had as a challenge when I was designing was not having available what I actually needed to build what I wanted. The lack of machinery like mills and lathes, the lack of even woodworking equipment, and the lack of materials to actually make the thing that I wanted. So a lot of times, it was interesting for me to figure out how I was going to build this. So, and yet I believe in design we have to be pushing limits all the time. We have to go beyond the limit to find out where the actual limit is. Like I said, you don't know where the edge is until you've stepped over it. Unfortunately, I don't know any other way to find it. You will not know exactly where that edge is until you've gone over it. But it's interesting to find out. Now, I'm going to point out I do that in everything, and I get criticized for it. If I'm doing a paint job, I put, you might say, one more color on there than what I should. You might, or I'll, take time to add a component that ends up not really working that well. If I'd have been conservative, I could have had what everybody else would have considered a success, but I wouldn't have known where the limits were. And then I have to back up. I have to make changes, and that's okay with me. But everybody else then has a field day criticizing. So you might say you better have some pretty thick skin if you're going to do these kind of things, if you're really into it. One of the things, I have a few things written down here, so one of the funny things is, though, that I read, or not read, a person said, his name's Jordan Peterson. He basically said, to expand your horizon, you need to limit yourself. Now, in my growing up, that just naturally happened for me. But he was pointing out that sometimes you don't want to have everything that you want, that you think you need, because that really actually narrows your way of thinking. It actually stymies your creativity. When you take some of your tools away from you and then say, now how are you going to do it? How are you going to make that item? It's not obvious at first. You really have to take a look and really think outside the box. But in the end, it will have expanded your abilities to design. In one case with me, actually I had a go-kart I wanted to build. And I'm going to point out, I never built two go-karts the same. My first one was literally my little red wagon. My second one, I took and cut, my third one actually, I took and I cut up my pedal vehicle, and which had rear steering, and flipped the thing around. I put leaf springs on it, And I got the leaf spring because I wanted suspension on it, but I didn't have anything I didn't have coil springs or anything like that to put on it. But here we had a buckboard, and a buckboard has a spring this way and a spring this way on both ends. Goes on top of an old wagon that's pulled by horses. So I took the one spring off and slid the two pieces apart, and they already had the holes in them that I needed, and I worked up and made myself shackles and everything else to mount it to it. And because I used a belt drive that was controlled by my foot, I could keep the belt tight even when the suspension was working. And so there was a way that I got my suspension. Just to point out, the other go-karts I built, one of them was with a Honda 50 engine, and we had 2-speed, and of course it didn't need a clutch. And I made a frame that had only one bar right down the middle, which worked out very well for that go-kart. Another one I built was actually one that I made look like a regular old go-kart, except for the steering. That was a rack on it for the steering, and I used a 8 horsepower motor, which was probably putting out 12 horsepower or more. In fact, and I used a differential on it, and that thing would probably go about 50 miles an hour. Another one was more like a dune buggy. We actually put a snowmobile engine on that and had Volkswagen suspension on the front, and I forget what we had for the rear. It might have been rigid, I don't remember. And then my last one I actually built with the intentions of later on giving it full independent suspension on the rear, but also it used a hydrostatic transmission and no brakes, because you just pulled back. You had one pedal for your throttle and the other pedal was controlling the hydrostat, and you could go forward and you had reverse on it. So those and that was all junk. Everything that the motors were junk, the differential, the hydrostat, the dune buggy, the whole thing. The only thing that was new was the tubing that we welded it up with. I say we because my brother-in-law was in my shop at the time. So we made do with what we had. And it's amazing how much better you are when you don't have everything. Because you think, oh, well, I gotta have this tool or I can't do it. Well, yeah, maybe, but how about if we do this or that? And you don't really need it all. Really, the less tools you have, you might say, the better. So here's another bit of philosophy with me. If I was the dean of like MIT or something like that, I would require art classes. I would require anybody that wants to create anything to have to take art. I don't care how bad you are at art. In art, there are no limits. And for you to be able to really just do whatever the hell comes in your mind is a way to help break down these laws that you have in your head that limit you from being able to think for yourself and to come up with your own ideas. So if you consider that, it really is a useful tool. If you haven't ever taken art classes, take some. They don't cost much. You can go to your community college. I've taken 5 courses. I even took art appreciation. Now that opened my mind, because here everybody's trying to say that the artist had this feeling or that feeling or whatever and all that, and sometimes it's true. However, I found that the artists, for the most part, either drew what somebody wanted with their twist on it, or they just enjoyed looking at what they made. It was their style. That's all it was, and it was great, you know. And that's good enough for art. It doesn't. Most art, you know, in other words, the artist ought to be pleased with it. And if everybody else is pleased with it, well, great, he makes money. If they don't, well, then that's the way it goes. You know, Bush is doing paintings. Not that I think his are very interesting in my mind, but hey, he's having a good time doing it. And maybe a couple people will buy them. And if nothing else, you know, when he dies, he can probably auction them off, and because he's a president, he'll get a few more bucks than some unknown like me, and then he'll make some money for a charity or something like that, and that's all. That's good enough. You know, that's really good enough. Designs should be as simple as possible. Now, I can't emphasize that enough. It should be simple to manufacture. It should be simple to operate. Now, here's when simple to create, I'll say, and simple to operate could clash. Sometimes in the effort to make it easy to manufacture or to create something, we end up causing it to be a lot harder to use. So I can build a car that's a lot simpler by putting pedals in there for you to make it go. Or let's put it this way, here's one. I could put a crank on the front to start the engine, and that'll simplify the car because I won't have to have a starter. I can eliminate all the electrical system for that, and the car's lighter, you know. But that's really not simpler for the person to use. So you design a more complicated so that it's easier for the user. I mean, you could have candles out there you have to light, but instead you create a whole wiring system and you put lights in it. And of course, in time, you learn how to simplify the manufacturing of all these components so that it's not so hard to include them. But in the manufacturing end of it and the building of it and all, you want to try to keep it as simple as possible. You know, Einstein wanted to come up with the formula that explained everything. And he wanted the formula to be maybe 1.5 inches long. That's it. E equals mc squared was at one point, I think he hoped was going to be that, you know, the key to that. Another product that I'm kind of proud of that we built, I say we, my friend Eddie and I built. We had a swimming pool, my parents did, and in ground, and it's no fun diving off the diving board because it's too close to the water. I wanted something that was up high so that you could get some feeling of weightlessness and things like that, and I wanted to be able to do a swan dive. That's really my whole goal. I just wanted to be able to do a swan dive. And him and me were out there and in the shed, and I noticed, maybe he noticed, a whole bunch of lumber that was racked up along the wall. It didn't take long. We found nails that were good enough to use for it, and we just started building. We didn't cut hardly anything except for the steps. That was the only boards we cut on the whole damn thing. No railings on it. No railings going up it. We wrapped some carpet around the steps that he happened to have laying around somewhere, and we put a piece of carpet on top of it. We built it in a shed, and then we had to carry it all the way to the house. That's about 1/8 of a mile. And this thing was heavier than hell. And then we had to get it over a 5-foot fence. 4 foot, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, we bent up the fence. It's a wonder I didn't get yelled at for that. Once we got it in the pool area, we're ready to go. We go run and get our swimsuits on, and of course we have a ball. Of course we didn't tie it down either. So one of the first times off of it, he pushes off and the whole thing slides backwards. So we figured out that one person had to stand behind it and hold it while the other person dove. Talk about safe. The first time I dove off of it, I was so afraid of hitting the bottom because we were maybe 10 feet up off the water, and we only had about 7, maybe a little more than 7.5 feet down, right in the very middle. That's it, because it was a bowl. And so I dove off of that, and as soon as I hit the water, I arched my back to come back up. I heard every damn vertebrae crack in my back, and it hurt so bad I swear I probably fractured something, because I laid out on the deck for a while to wait for everything to kind of ease back up. I finally learned that as soon as you hit the water, just relax, and just stay aiming towards the deepest part and relax. Just let your arms come back and all that, and all that extra turbulence would end up stopping you, and you didn't have to worry about it. There was enough friction there, stop you easily. And you know, I'd seen cliff diving, and hell, those guys were in 12 feet of water and I don't know how far up. And when you picture that, well, really, I shouldn't have been so afraid, but it's like anything, you just don't know, so you do what you think's right, and then you do then you know what really is right. And that's part of, you know, pushing the limits. And you're going to pay the price sometimes. Sometimes in criticism, sometimes in failures. It just is, it's part of the process. So when you're designing, you know, be ready for the mistakes. What is it they said? You make 10 mistakes and you finally succeed on the, we'll say the 10th time, you know 9 ways not to do it. So you actually have learned something. In fact, what the hell, I'll tell you this one, even if you turn me off before I get done. They hired this young guy in this corporate firm, and I'm trying to think of what they call them, the younger corporate people. But anyway, he's an intern of sorts. And, you know, he seemed to be doing a really good job. And then on this one project, he made a miscalculation, and he lost the company $1 million. Now, his higher-ups were all his. I'm talking about the company's CEOs, higher-ups, were all telling him that this guy's got to go. You know, he's was taught, or has, you know, is in his training, and here he screws up this big. And And the owner, I mean the CEO, said to the other guys, he says, I've just invested $1 million in training for this guy. You think I'm going to let him go now? Thanks for listening to me to the end. Talk to you next time.